Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Interconnection Process Enhancements, or ICE 2023 stakeholder meeting to discuss the Track 1 final proposal and draft tariff language. My name is Caitlin McGee, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the ISO, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. I'm also joined by Bob Emmert, Senior Manager of Interconnection Resources, and Bill Weaver, Assistant General Counsel. As a reminder, the presentation and agenda for this meeting can be found on the Policy Initiatives webpage under the Stay Informed tab of our website. Before we get started, a few housekeeping reminders today. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We try to keep these meetings structured in a way to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, but we also ask that you keep your comments professional and respectful, and to please try to refrain from repeating what has already been said. Next slide, please. There's a few ways to raise your hand today if you want to make a comment or ask a question. If you're connected to the WebEx platform through your computer or the Call Me option, you can click the raise hand icon there, located in the right corner above the chat window, and that'll put you in the queue to make your question or comment. You could also put your question into the chat and send it to all panelists. I'll read your question aloud. And if you're joining us on the audio only line, you can press #2, and that'll add you to the queue. When making your comment today, please remember to state your name and affiliation. If you need any technical assistance during the meeting, please send a chat to the event producer. Next slide. And here we have today's agenda. So again, just going through our typical welcome and process for today's meeting. We're going to hand it over to Bob in a second here to walk us through the 2023 initiative and Track 1, and then we'll hand it over to Bill to take us through the tariff changes and close it out with next steps and overview of our initiative schedule that we've completed. Next slide, please. And here's an image of the California ISO's policy initiative stakeholder process. I know many of you are familiar with this. You'll see here we are towards the end of our proposal development with our final proposal today and going to the board meeting in May. Next slide, please. So with that, I will hand it over to Bob to take us through the initiative.
All right, thank you, Caitlin, and good morning, everybody. So these first couple slides are background slides that, for the most part, are unchanged. So I'll go through these pretty quickly just to provide the background for everybody. That's for those who may be new on the call. So this ICE process is working towards transformational changes to break down barriers to efficient and timely resource development and to achieve the state's vastly accelerated pace for new resources that must be connected to the grid based on state mandates for transformation from out of carbon emitting type resources and to meet load growth that is coming out of the CEC long-term forecast. And also the overheated cluster 15 window that is just closed reinforces the need for change. Cluster 15 received about 545 interconnection requests, which far surpasses the cluster 14 supercluster 373 requests. So if we could go to the next slide. So the ICE initiative is part of a larger set of foundational framework improvements that are being coordinated between the CPUC and the CEC and the ISO. And the memorandum of understanding that created the background for this was signed back in December of 2022, and it sets the direction for tightening the linkages between the transmission planning process, interconnection process, and resource procurement. And we are now looking at making reforms to the Interconnection 2 process to leverage the improved coordination planning set out by that MOU. So next slide, please. So IPE is being carried out in 2 tracks, where track 1 has been focused on immediate adjustments to cluster 15 and allows for completion of cluster 14 phase 2 studies. And track 2 will be to be able to work through the track 2 process so that the changes will be in place when we restart cluster 15. And as I said earlier, we'll take that to the board in May. Track 2 will focus on changes to the GitApp cluster study process needed to achieve the MOU goals. These are the transformational changes that we're speaking about. So we'll be putting out the track 2 initial straw proposals sometime in late May, no later than the end of May, but it might be sooner than that. And it's going to be focusing on what do we need to do for resuming cluster 15, what the studies will be looking like for cluster 15. And it'll also be putting forth the schedule for cluster 15 and also for cluster 16 and beyond. So it's going to be putting in place the processes for interconnection request processing and studying from 15 on. And we'll be going to the board in December with those changes. So before I get into the next set of slides, are there any questions on this?
I do not see any questions.
Okay, well, let's move to the next slide. And I've got 3 slides, so I'll go through these 3 slides first, and then I'll open it up for questions. So track 1, the final proposal is what has been out and been commented on. The majority of stakeholders support the proposal, and some ask for some clarifying questions. The information in these slides has been adjusted so that it does align with the proposed tariff changes, which were slight tweaks to what was in the final proposal. So the first step is to accept cluster 15 interconnection requests, which has been done during the window from April 3rd to the 17th, and perform the completeness review process. The next step will be to postpone cluster 15 interconnection requests. They will not go through the scoping meeting and studies until we complete the track 2 process, and the schedule for doing that will be developed in the track 2 process. Interconnection customers may withdraw interconnection requests at any time prior to April 1. So now that we've got this many requests and people now see the date that that cluster 15 will be picked up again in mid-2024, they decide they would like to withdraw, they can receive a refund of their study deposit, including interest, minus any cost of processing their interconnection requests. And if projects did submit a site exclusivity deposit and withdraw, they will receive a complete refund of the deposit, including interest. And interconnection customers may modify their interconnection requests between May 1st, 2024, through the proposed validation due date of September 26, 2024. And cluster 16 schedule, that's also to be determined based on track 2. There were some questions in the comments about when is cluster 16 going to happen, and that'll be determined by track 2. Next slide, please. And related to cluster 14, we are revising the study report deadline to January 31st, 2024 from the original November date. The second interconnection financial security posting will be postponed an equal number of days because of that delay. And the next transmission plan deliverability allocation cycle has also been postponed to allow cluster 14 to participate. Related to the ISP, there's been some comments related to that where the ISO will not be accepting ISP interconnection request until the cluster 15 has received its phase 1 study results. Based on the get up tariff and the BPM requirements, ISP's electrical independence tests for any new ISPs from this point forward must wait for cluster 15 study results. And so we are going to hold off on accepting ISP interconnection requests until cluster 15 studies have been done. This will help to ensure that the ISP process does not get ahead of any process modifications developed in track 2. And next slide, please. And then related to the other issues for consideration of long lead time resources that was in the paper, the ISO will not be doing a unique study process or schedule for the offshore wind or out-of-state wind resources. Those items are being handled within the transmission planning process and the PTO transmission interconnection process. And so nothing will be done special for those type of resources, and there was no stakeholder opposition to this proposal. So that ends my portion of the presentation. Let's go ahead and open it up for questions.
We do have a question in the chat from Alan C., New Consulting. This is a clarifying question. Given that C14 P2 reports will be published no later than January 31st, 2024, the affidavits for projects seeking and retaining deliverability in the 2023-2024 cycle will not be due until sometime after issuance of the P2 reports, for example, February 2024. Affidavit due dates or the fact they are sequential to issuance of the current year's P2 study is not very clear in the GIDAP tariff and the GIDAP BPM.
Yes, the date for receiving the TPD affidavits is based on the tariff or the BPM says it's going to be done by market notice. So there is no date set. So it's up to the ISO to determine what date we think is appropriate. And that's something we look at internally every year and choose a date that's appropriate. We always make sure there's enough time for the current projects coming out of their phase 2 studies that have just received those phase 2 studies to have some amount of time to review their studies before they have to put in their affidavit. So at this point, we don't have a date for it, but it'll be sometime in February.
All right, we do have a few hands raised. We'll start with Susan Schneider. Go ahead.
Hi, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Just trying. I always check the first time. Okay, I do have actually a few questions. Would you mind going back to slide 9, please? Okay, I have a question about under number 2, the first point. I thought that the written proposal actually said there would be no change to the refundability for study deposits, which means that would be, I think it's up to 30 days after the scoping meeting. There's a chance for people to get people can get their study deposits back less any costs incurred. But this, and I think the written proposal says that and says there would, those existing rules would stay in place. But the tariff language says April 1st. So I'm wondering, which one is it? Is it that the existing rules stay in place so you have until 30 days after the scoping meeting, or is it April 1st?
Well, the way that we have this now is April 1st is an absolute guarantee that you can go ahead and withdraw your project by then and receive a full refund. Beyond that, the way the tariff is written now, yes, you can still withdraw all the way up to 30 days after your scoping meeting. However, whatever takes place within the track 2 discussions and proposals and final processing for interconnection requests, it's possible that could be changed. So we wanted to put in this date here just to make sure that everybody understands they've got the next year to be able to withdraw their project. It may not change. from what it is right now, but we'll just have to wait and see on that.
Okay, so in the proposal where it says that those existing rules would stay in place, that's not quite accurate. It's that those rules could change, and it's this April 1st that's really the sort of the what I think you're referring to is sort of the guarantee date. But it could be that
Right.
afterwards you might not have till 30 days after the scoping meeting to actually to make that withdrawal and get your most or all of your money back.
Yeah, I just don't want to make that guarantee that that's going to continue. You know, as your slide says, the final proposal based on in this presentation was adjusted to align with the way the tariff is written. So, you know, that adjustment was made to this information here.
Okay, so that's actually quite different than what was in the earlier proposal that people had a chance to comment on. And I guess first of all, in that nuance, I'm not sure is clear. And second, there was a really good reason for people to be able to wait for 30 days after the scoping meeting, because there's a very important information in the scoping meeting that would potentially impact their intention or their ability to withdraw. And
Well,
I'm wondering if the CAISO has considered that in sort of revoking that provision.
Well, we haven't revoked it, Susan, but we just don't know what track 2 will actually look like in the end. So, you know, so let's not get into debating track 2 items here on this call.
Okay, and but I appreciate the clarification, because I'm not sure that because the proposal still says the existing rules would stay in place, and so I think there's just a little bit of confusion there about that particular thing. So anyway, thank you for the clarification. I also wanted to ask about sort of the sequence. So April 1st is sort of the date where the CAISO is going to turn its attention again, or that's the intention, back to cluster 15, and the modification requests start in May. So I'm wondering, are you planning to validate the existing applications during April, and that's why the modification period starts May 1st? Or is the validation going to wait until the modifications? I mean, you obviously have to redo the validation in some way if there's a modification. But what's the difference between April? You know, the modification process doesn't start in April; it doesn't start till May. So what do you think? What do you envision happening during April?
Primarily, since the due date for the phase 2 study has been moved back to January 31st, we have results meetings to be able to have to do for all these projects. So we wanted to make sure we had enough time to do that. And we thought there's no reason to push the team and of our folks, the PTO folks, as well as interconnection customers to try to have to get all those results meetings done in such a short period of time. And get the meeting minutes completed and so forth. So we decided to give ourselves a little bit of extra time for doing that.
Okay. So you still wouldn't be doing the validation until, say, after the close of the modification period, so you don't have to do it twice. Is that the intent?
Well, right now we've got nearly 550 interconnection requests.
Right.
We're not going to be. I do not anticipate doing validation of all of those based on what I think we're going to be proposing in track 2. So we'll have to wait and see. So the validation process and what goes on after that is all going to be developed in track 2. So we need to get that information and that tariff language put in place to know how we're going to proceed from April 1st on.
Okay. So it could be that, for example, if people would give you an affirmation that they're not changing, then maybe you could start some validation in May, whereas other people, you may have to wait till after, till later in the period if they're making changes. So you don't do it twice, right?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. And then I did have a question on slide 10 on the independent study process. The tariff language is pretty clear that it talks about that it's only generating facilities in a study area with active interconnection requests where the validation or the processing of an ISP request has to wait till the phase 1 study's done for the prior cluster. It's not everywhere. It's only in those areas. Now, it could be with 500 and whatever, phase clusters 15 requests, there are not many areas where there aren't any. But is it possible that there could be some areas where there aren't any in the study area, and then they might not have, the tariff wouldn't provide for them to wait?
Well, as you said, I would anticipate every study area has interconnection projects in it, so I don't think that's really an issue. And at the same time, our teams are going to be working very diligently on Cluster 14 Phase 2. And we don't want to be in a process where, you know, potentially we could see getting a flood of ISP projects trying to get ahead of Cluster 15. And we'd be in a mode of trying to validate all those interconnection requests, check for eligibility and so forth. And that all takes time. And we want to just to give everybody time to complete Cluster 14 as well.
Would it be possible for that ISP validation to take place after Cluster 14? I mean, it looks like you're not going to be starting really on the Phase 1 study, even starting on it until after September of 2024. So is it possible that ISP requests could possibly be processed before that period in areas maybe where well, I mean, let's say maybe there are not many study areas that there are, but is it possible that some could actually be validated for independence, for example, electrical independence, if, you know, before you actually start on the Phase 1 study?
Before we start Cluster 15 Phase 1?
Yes.
No, the tariff says we need to have that Phase 1 study done in order to test for independence.
In areas where you have applications.
Right.
So, no, not correct. That's where we're missing it.
Oh,
like the
okay, I'm just reading it.
Tariff
Yeah, go ahead,
says,
sorry.
yeah. I know you're looking at for active interconnection requests, but if you look at 4.1.5 of the GitHub, that's what we're actually talking about here, and that has nothing to do with whether there are active projects in the area, right? That's for the independence test. But the tariff says that we don't even start the independence tests once a cluster is started, and that's the roadblock here. But I mean, whether we can modify this is really more of a track 2 issue to accommodate the type of studies you're talking about. But we wanted to clarify that, you know, at this point, we really don't intend to, because we don't want a flood of ISPs drawing us away from Cluster 14 and trying to get ahead of Cluster 15.
Okay, well, I mean, if you read the tariff language, it talks about the 30-day, you're supposed to let people know within 30 days whether they've satisfied the independence request. And then it says, for a proposed generating facility in a study area with active interconnection requests in the current Q cluster, such 30-day calendar period will commence when the Phase 1 study results are available, blah, blah, blah. So it only talks about in areas where there are active interconnection requests. And that term is not actually defined in the tariff. I guess my question is, I don't want to waste a lot of time here because, you know, there were some arguments made in the comments. My question is would it be possible for the CAISO to actually address those arguments so that we can, you know, so we don't have to take time here to do that?
I mean, 2 things. First, I think we are addressing them, and I think you've seen the tariff clarifications that make our intent very clear. We don't intend to accept ISPs. The other issue I wanted to touch on was, you know, the tariff language is a little different than what you described. It's not that there are active interconnection requests. It's that the study results for active interconnection requests. That's
reading
what
it from the tariff.
we're basing it on, right?
So.
Right. No, I know you're reading it from the tariff, but a lot of people look at that and say, oh, there's active interconnection requests, but it's actually whether the study results for the active interconnection customers, and those study results won't include, you know, withdrawals and modifications until the next phase of the Cluster 14 study. So it's not necessarily whether every project is, you know, quote unquote active.
Well, the term active is not defined, and in the tariff, it's not capitalized and it's not a defined term. And I was actually reading just the language from the tariff, so that is what it says.
I know. Active isn't a defined term because it just means what it means in English. Then.
Okay, but then it says for in an area where there are active interconnection requests, you have to wait for the phase 1 study to be done. I think that's in there, but it does not say what happens in areas where there are not. So where you say if you could verify that every area has active interconnections, I mean we're kind of blind right now. So if you could verify that yes, every study area has active interconnection requests, which may be true with 500 some cluster 15 studies, that would sort of kind of at least close that open loop right now in terms of what the tariff says.
Yeah, and cluster 14, all the previous clusters and previous ISPs as well. But yeah, I understand.
Yeah, no, that's right. But it talks about the phase 1 study, and cluster 14 phase 1 study is already done.
Okay, we'll take a look and get back to you, Susan.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And that's all I have right now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. We do have a hand raised from Song Zhu. Go ahead.
This is Song Zhu from Great Bright on behalf of California Wind Association. On previous page 9, just have a quick clarifying question. So the window for modification is May 1st to September 26th. But between now and May 1st, could the interconnection customer submit modification, even though ISO may not look at them, but could they just submit the modification now?
I would say no. I think this tariff language is pretty explicit that they'll basically have the opportunity starting May 1. I mean, if you submit one now, someone may say, oh, you know, by May 1, I may want to change it again. So let's just wait until we really see how track 2 plays out, what cluster 15 process looks like. And then it's, you know, everybody will have the best information to know how would I want my project to move forward? What do I want it to look like? What changes I want to make?
Okay, so people should hold on the modification and submit all after May 1st. On the ISP, you had enough discussion with Susan. I don't want to waste your time, but just want to reiterate our comments. I understand your concern. You don't want the ISP, but actually, there are very few projects can qualify for ISP. So if they are truly project at the right location and could move quickly, I think ISO should help them to get built on time instead of make them wait for cluster 15 phase 1 study results. That's all my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Next, we have Dariush Hamadi. Go ahead.
Bob, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm with Songzai, so with Great Bright on behalf of Calvia. Just first going to yeah, this is the right slide. Just a clarifying question. So the scoping meetings for cluster 15 are expected to be somewhere in fourth quarter of 2024, correct?
Well, I don't really want to speculate on what track 2 will look like. We're going to be coming out with a number of proposals for processing interconnection requests from cluster 15 forward, and each of them look different. And so I can't really speculate on timing for starting the process of validation.
Okay, so you're suggesting that when validations are done, that may be that when validations are done on a particular application, you may hold the scoping meeting after the validation is over, and it could happen between May 1, after May 1, 2024, not necessarily after September 26, 2024.
Well, again, I'd just be speculating on what the process looks like, so I don't want to do that.
I'm definitely extrapolating linearly. Will you be posting the projects which have submitted the applications, not having been validated yet or not? Would that list be posted at any time, or we are going to wait until sometime in September of 2024 before we see list of projects in cluster 15?
Well, for cluster 14, we did provide, and we didn't post it in the Q report, but we did provide the information of the projects that we received. However, in the track 1 final proposal, stakeholder comments, we had kind of an equal number of responders saying they'd like to see a posting of those projects, and a number that said we just as soon keep that confidential so that people don't have more information to be able to change their projects once they see the queue, see the details of the queue, because that's something that we typically haven't done in the past, where you show all the projects and then give everybody a chance to make significant adjustments to their interconnection request. So we haven't decided what we're going to do on that one. We need to have some internal discussions and before we decide how we're going to deal with that.
Okay, another clarifying questions, and you may not have the answer to this one. There are PTOs have their own cluster 15 process. Have they decided, if you're aware, they've been working with you, do you know if they're going to line up their process with yours or not?
I would say no final decision's been made, but we have had discussions, and they are thinking of potentially going ahead and just moving forward on their standard schedule. So you will need to contact the individual PTOs to find out what their plans are. Okay.
Fair. And final question, I'm glad you brought up the issue of stakeholder comments. The first point of this slide, it says majority of stakeholders support whatever you have put out in track 1. And maybe you can tell me, Darsh, go look at this website and we'll tell you who our majority are. Just was wondering if this majority are in certain class of customers, in other words, all the utilities quite understandably supporting your application, and all the developers understandably maybe having concerns about your application. Do you have any specific class of customers which have supported the cluster 15, at least track 1 final proposal?
I can't give you the numbers, but from my recollection, the majority, let me put it this way, very few actually objected to it. And for the most part, developers were, using language like, well, while it's unfortunate that we have to do this, we understand the need to make some changes in order to process cluster 15. So, it was one of those things where people weren't necessarily happy, but they understood. And so
we
I took that as support.
We definitely understand, unfortunately, but did they also support all the elements, especially in the developers list, the elements of your proposal, like having the window now and having the application reviewed a year from now and sitting on the deposits for a whole year and so on? Did they also at least support that by saying, unfortunately, we support that or something? Or is that...
Yeah. From my read of it, yes, Darius, they did. And then they went on to make comments about, wanting clarifying information about some of the things that are described in this slide and that type of thing. So not too many people dwelled on the fact that, okay, you had a window and now you're sitting on it. They were more interested in understanding, okay, can we withdraw? What's the process for that? And so forth. So, beyond going any further, I think it's best, Darius, that you go ahead and read the comments yourself.
Sure. The problem is I read it and I couldn't see the majority, but I'm glad we had this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We do have a question from Rayanne Quadra on the line. Go ahead.
This morning. I don't know whether my questions here are for you or for Bill or for both of you, but in addition to the items that you showed on your slide today, I noticed in the tariff language, section 17.1, item E, that the CAISO won't open Q cluster 16 until 2024. You know, I thought that this effort was going to be all just track 1 items, and that seemed like it probably fell into track 2. I don't necessarily oppose the proposal, but definitely want to see the CAISO go on the record, you know, onto what the logic for that is procedurally in the paper. So I wonder if you could reflect on that here today.
Yeah, I can address that. I mean, and I would say, I mean, most of the comments, now Dariush has me worried about saying majority. I'll say, anyway, most of the comments were universal in that they reflected 2 things on the tariff revisions. They were in support, they were concerned about the ISP, and then they also had the exact same issue that you had on cluster 16. And we agree. I think we just got a little ahead of ourselves on those tariff revisions. So we're going to strike that subsection, defer the issue to track 2, and just have the tariff revisions focus on cluster 15.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Like I said, it's not that I necessarily oppose, just trying to procedurally track things here. And gosh, too early this morning, haven't had my coffee. Oh, on the topic of publishing cluster 15, you know, due to sort of the quickness of all this and other things we have going on, I didn't even realize that the CAISO was asking for input about publishing cluster 15 in the comments, and I want to go on the record for EDF and say that we would like to have cluster 15 published at some point, similar to the way cluster 14 was. And I think, you know, it's one of those things where, while I recognize some other stakeholders might feel that there will be rejiggering happening, that's happening anyway behind the scenes. You know, developers know what's going on, and people are talking, and having that cluster 15 data out there gives us all the opportunity to take a look at it as we consider proposals that the CAISO is going to put out in track 2. I feel like, you know, stakeholders are at, you know, an analytical disadvantage, basically, if we don't have at least some general understanding of what cluster 15 looks like as we talk about what might work for processing that supercluster.
Just to be clear, we did not ask for comments on that, but we received them. And so
well, that makes me feel a little
kind
better.
of what has raised the issue.
All right. Well, I guess I said my piece on that. Thanks for your time today.
Sure, thank you.
And then we have a hand raised from Kathleen Colbert. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I had a couple things to share, mostly questions, but the cluster 15 publishing of it being new, I did also want to share, if since you're asking for feedback, we definitely support making that and publishing a cluster 15 request that you've received. Bringing in suggestions to do it similarly to how cluster 14 was done makes sense. I like the comment about the analytical disadvantage. I'll share with you that, you know, hearing that there's roughly 550 some projects that were submitted is daunting. And I know it's daunting to you, but it's also daunting from the outside. And transparency is going to be incredibly important. So if you could publish those, we strongly support it because we need that transparency. Over the next year, we need to be able to start analyzing and as track 2 unfolds and projects that are, you know, and hopefully that transparency will help incentivize projects that aren't a good fit as those policies are discussed to very seriously consider the prudent action of stepping out and withdrawing before you have to begin your work in mid-2024. So that's the reason that we're super supportive of transparency. I just wanted to throw that out there before I ask the clarifying question. With the spirit of, you know, transparency and data-driven decisions as we get towards that mid-2024, I really appreciate you putting into the draft tariff language some additional milestones for the cluster 14 that you were considering. It wasn't in the last iteration of the paper, so we didn't have a lot of time to think through the implications. And I wanted to ask you if we could do so right now before we start talking in more detail. And specifically what I'm trying to process, or what Vista is trying to process, is the delay of the phase 2, cluster 14 phase 2 study to January 31. That was in the paper, that made sense to get some additional time to process. The delay of the transmission plan deliverability allocation process itself wasn't something we had discussed. You're proposing to move that to end of May, which is 2 months later than the deadline to withdraw with no penalty for the cluster 15 request. I had assumed that the TPD kind of process for cluster 14 and the TPD allocation report transparently would be a very important data input into some of those decisions leading up until that April 1st timeline for withdrawal. Are you at all concerned that without the TPD allocation results for cluster 14 being available to interconnection customers prior to April 1st, that there will be less transparency into what projects should be withdrawn?
I think I would put it differently. From our perspective, there are so many projects and megawatts in cluster 14 that once you finish the phase 2 study report, they're ready to move into the procurement process. And the procurement process wants to know whether a project has deliverability or not. So from our perspective, we need to get that information to cluster 14 as quickly as possible. We don't want to wait to the next cycle. So, you know, that's always been our plan, is once cluster 14 is done, you know, we thought the plan was typically on schedule, which is a normal schedule, to have the affidavits due in December after the phase 2 study reports come out in November. But since we are delaying the phase 2 study reports coming out, we needed to delay the affidavit process. And then we need time to do the study work, to, you know, process all the affidavits, do the study work, and determine who gets deliverability. So we need that extra time for publishing the actual results as written in the tariff.
I think and I just wanted to, do you have some help? Yeah.
I was going to say too, I think you're, you know, we kind of have a false premise here too, because this gets back to Bob's, I think, first discussion on, you know, the additional normal withdrawal procedures, you know, up until 30 days after the scoping meeting. Like, you know, those will certainly still exist in some form, if not the exact same form that they are now. So that, you know, that withdrawal deadline, first of all, is a very kind of soft deadline because it just moves into another withdrawal period. It's more of a clarification, just letting these cluster 15 interconnection customers who are in limbo know that, you know, they can withdraw at any time and get as much money back. They don't have to wait until that normal withdrawal period after validation.
Hey, Bill, that's really helpful. I'm just looking at your language. Can you do us a favor and look at that 17.1 subsection D that you got drafted and just make sure that it's consistent with what you just described? I'll defer to you, you're the attorney. But that your answer of it kind of being more soft and being able to move after the scoping meeting, I think does buy a lot of comfort. So if you could double check that, we would be really appreciative of.
Yeah. Did you say, you said D?
I think it's, oh wait, sorry, it's C. An interconnection,
okay.
Yeah, so withdrawing by April 1st. It read to me fairly finite, but if that's meant to be more flexible, maybe that's something you could take a look at.
Yeah, and maybe it's just putting something similar to what we have in B about other modification provisions to clarify that.
Perfect.
Yeah, okay. I see what you mean. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. The second clarifying question we had is this idea of it, you know, the results moving from March roughly, and I know we got ours in, you know, time, I recognize you need more time. So I wanted to ask if you were thinking that this move from releasing the TPD results in March to May, if you're thinking of that as a permanent change, or if you are thinking of it as a one-time change for cluster 14 for now.
At this point, a one-time change, but again, timelines could change based on what we do in track 2. So, you know, can't guarantee anything, and so it'd be premature to really nail down timing in future clusters.
I think that makes perfect sense. Just encourage us as we move into track 2 to kind of be mindful of what do we need for one-time changes for cluster 15 versus what are persistent timeline changes. Would be helpful to think about it that way as we start working on that. And thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Just so you know that the way that we process these items such as TPD allocation, everything is in a sequential study that is very closely aligned with the transmission planning process. With you know, this is part of the reassessment. This is kind of step 1 of the reassessment. So everything is done in a very scheduled manner to where they have to, you know, all the pieces have to fit together in a sequential way to make it work. So, you know, all these things are connected. So, you know, if one piece changes, you got to change a lot of pieces. So, you know, those kind of things will be discussed in track 2. But at the same time, they kind of lock us in to what we're doing.
No, I think that's super helpful, Bob. I appreciate it. I'll leave maybe a last plug. I know we put these in our comments, but we support you. So this is supportive of you doing what you need to do to get the cluster 14 and cluster 15 processed in a rational way as quickly as we can, but doing the work that you need to do. So we're on the same team. I think we're moving in the same direction. Supportive of your ISP clarification. So while it may not be a majority, I will say Vista is supportive of the CAISO in your direction. What is important to us is that we think about this very sequential pattern that you just described, this process with the eye towards cluster 16. And once we get cluster 16 up and going, hopefully we've returned to a recurring cadence similar to what we were used to prior to cluster 14. So I think that is our mission, that's our goal, and we're supportive of what mechanisms we need to take between now and then to get there. But I completely agree with you. We just need to figure out a path back to that cadence.
Okay, thank you.
We did get a few comments, questions in the chat. I'll read those aloud real quick. We had a question from Lyndon Repsol from Renewable North America. When is the anticipated phase 1 study for the C15?
Good question. We'll have to determine that in track 2.
And then a question from Jerry Melcher. When will the 545 cluster 15 interconnection requests be posted to the CAISO interconnection queue in the public RIMS database spreadsheet?
Well, at this point, our process is once the projects are validated, then we give them a queue number and then they go into the queue report. Since cluster 15 projects will not be given a queue number yet, if we publish them, we'd be doing it in some form of an Excel spreadsheet. And at this point, we don't know when we'll be doing that. We have to, like I said earlier, we'll have to have some internal discussions and decide what our path forward on that is.
All right, and then we got a comment from David Corzelius at PG&E saying, I'd like to recommend that the term active does need to be defined better in the tariff. There was an issue in 2015, 2016 with the DGD process that required it to be defined, at least for the process to better describe when a project was eligible to apply to the DGB process, but that specific case may not apply to what is an active project in different interconnection study process. Is a project still being considered in the application stage considered active? What about projects that are suspended or parked?
I think the easiest definition for active is look at the Q report, look at the first tab. First tab is full of active projects. Those are all active projects. Anything that is withdrawn or completed is no longer active.
All right. And then we have one last hand raised on the line. Rachel Bird, go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This is Rachel Bird on behalf of New Leaf Energy. I'll be brief since I know you mentioned, Bill, Bob, this is not an area you sought feedback on, but I did want to respond about—
Rachel, I can barely hear you. Can you speak up a little bit or get closer to the microphone?
Yeah, is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'll be brief. I'm commenting on behalf of New Leaf Energy, since I know this issue is not one you've sought feedback on explicitly, but since a few other stakeholders have commented, I wanted to speak in favor of keeping the Cluster 15 details, with delaying publication of Cluster 15 details until after the modification window has passed. We do believe that any modifications next summer should be based only on the new procedures adopted in Track 2 and not by decisions made by other developers. Effectively, we don't think folks should be able to look at their competitors' strategies to make their modification decisions, but rather base those decisions only on any new information or policies adopted. So thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Okay, thank you.
And Susan Schneider, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Just a little parting shot on the ISP. If active interconnection requests are in tab 1 of the queue, those and you're not adding anything from cluster 15 until after the validation, they won't be in that tab. So the term active, I think, is still, sounds like it is still very unclear. And we agree with PG&E that it would be a good to have that be a defined term.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, that's all I see for questions at this time.
All right, we'll turn it over to Bill.
I don't have anything to share. As I said, in response to Rayanne's comments, the stakeholders supported the tariff revisions and thought they were consistent with the Track 1 proposal. There were policy questions on whether the clarification on the current tariff for ISP was correct. I think we've addressed that here. The other group of comments was saying that the subsection 17.1E may have been premature to say that CAISO won't open cluster 16 in 2024. We agree, taking that out. That's a Track 2 issue. The only other thing I heard on this call was to clarify under 17.1C that withdrawals under that provision, don't exclude or change interconnections rights under the GIT app after that to withdraw and receive whatever the GIT app provides to them back in terms of deposit minus cost plus interest. But I'll take this time to see if anyone wants to talk to about anything else under the tariff revisions.
I believe we have a question from Susan Schneider, unless your hand is up from a few minutes ago. Go ahead.
No, my hand is up again. Hey, I guess I'm confused again on this April 1st versus after the scoping meetings. So what I heard from what I thought Bob said that even though the current rules allow the withdrawal after 30 days after the scoping meeting and getting your money back except whatever's been spent, it sounds like you're saying that maybe those rules will stay in place. I guess are the current rules going to stay in place, or you're still potentially going to change them, so having them stay in place even though it's in the proposal document is not necessarily part of this proposal? I just want to make sure we really understand what the CAISO, what your current proposal is.
Yeah, fair question. I think the short answer is that it's a track 2 issue, right? But this set of tariff provisions doesn't change interconnection customers' rights, you know, between validation and after scoping to withdraw, or any withdrawal rights, right? So at least until we bring the track 2, there would be no change. And then after that, I think we're speculating. For me, it's hard to imagine why the logic of allowing a free withdrawal would change, you know, post-scoping and we actually start the study. But maybe Bob has other ideas. So we'll have to address it with stakeholders in track 2. But until we have, it's certainly, you know, the active tariff. And if we did change it, we would have to change not only whatever those provisions are, but also change whatever we're putting in right now in the track 1 cluster 15 tariff provisions. Did that make sense?
I guess, but you know, if you've got it in the proposal document that they're going to stay the same, which is what the proposal document says, yes, things could change. And I guess I'm wondering, it sounds like then that is not really part of your proposal. The proposal is that that's up to change, and you're not saying that it necessarily will stay the same. And so unless you're saying it really will stay the same, you shouldn't say that in your proposal. It's just very confusing, you know, because people. Well, I mean, I guess maybe by that time, you know, you'll be past track 2 and maybe people will understand the conflict there. But it does seem like you're actually not saying that they will necessarily stay the same. So why would you say that they will? And anyway, I'm just saying it is a point of some confusion.
Okay.
So
we'll take that back. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks.
I'm not seeing any other questions. Maybe we'll give it another minute or so.
Well, I'll give my normal spiel and say too that you know, the tariff provisions aren't part of the policy that, you know, go to the board, and therefore, you know, all stakeholders should feel free to reach out to me if other things occur to them on the tariff provisions up until we file, because I'm happy to take those calls or emails and address them, and we do have that room to maneuver so long as the tariff stays consistent with the policy. So please, I don't think we're going to have another tariff call or solicit comments on tariff provisions if we you know, post a second version or anything. But please feel free to reach out to me at any time if anything occurs to anyone.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have for questions here.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Bill. Event producer, if you could just jump to slide 12. All right, thank you. So thanks everyone for your great questions. We'll wrap it up with next steps here. Next slide, please. So as you see here, this is the track 1 initiative schedule. We completed our stakeholder call today to discuss the draft tariff language and final proposal. And then this will be going to the Board of Governors on May 17th. And then we'll be posting our tentative schedule for track 2 shortly. We do have a tentative schedule or a tentative date for the straw proposal posted on the initiative webpage, but we'll make more updates shortly. Next slide, please. And then this first bullet point here is, of course, the initiative webpage. So you can go there to take a look at our final proposal for track 1, the draft tariff language, and then any updates for track 2 will also be posted to the initiative webpage. If you want to stay up to date on updates for ICE track 2, feel free to subscribe to the California ISO's daily briefing. You'll get updates in your inbox. And if you have any last-minute questions or anything that comes to mind, feel free to reach out to ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com. Next slide, please. And then we really encourage you to check out the Energy Matters blog. This is found on our website. Down here at the bottom of this slide, something that might be of interest to this group is the draft 2022-2023 transmission plan blog post. So go ahead and check that out. You can click the image in the PDF version of this that's posted to the initiative webpage if you can't access the link from our California ISO homepage. So thanks again, everyone, for your participation and thoughtful questions, and a big thanks to our presenters, Bill and Bob. All right, have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using event services. You may now disconnect.